After what feels like an eternity of waiting, Grim Dawn's third and final expansion, Fangs of Asterkarn, is finally here. First announced in August of 2023, it has been a patience tester like no other for the last 3 years. But was it worth the wait? I'm not going to bury the lead in this video. Yes, I think Fangs of Asterkarn is absolutely worth the wait. I think it's the best expansion Grim Dawn has ever seen, and by no small margin. If I can get away with saying so, I think it alone competes with the best of the best in the modern ARPG space. If you've played and enjoyed Grim Dawn before, Fangs of Asterkarn will deliver in so many ways, from an incredible and massive world to explore, to challenging and exciting boss encounters, to some insane loot to find and build around. It's a bit weird to say, because we know Grim Dawn 2 is somewhere over the horizon, but Fangs of Asterkarn legitimately feels like a faithful sequel to all things Grim Dawn, despite being a mere expansion pack and not a full game. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. There are a few things in Fangs of Asterkarn that don't land quite right with me. Over the course of this review, I want to highlight both the highs and the lows of the expansion, while generally trying to keep things as spoiler-free as I can. To that end, the footage you see in the background was recorded entirely in pre-expansion areas and only on pre-existing difficulty settings. While some expansion items do drop and you may catch a glimpse of the updated world map, I made an effort to make everything in this video as devoid of spoilers as possible, save for the baller background music you hear now. But who am I to be making this review? I'll keep my introduction as short as I can because this video isn't about me, but I'm Cino. I've been playing ARPGs like Diablo 2 and Titan Quest since I was a kid. I was invited to be a closed playtester for Grim Dawn when the Crucible was in development back in 2016. I'm also the present owner and administrator for Grim Dawn's community-run Discord server. Come explore and discuss the new expansion with us. I'll put a link to the server in the description below. I have also been creating quality of life and original content mods for Grim Dawn since the modding tools were first released. Long ago, in a restaurant far, far away, there are rumors I've even met and exchanged stories with the developers at Crate Entertainment. All this is to say that I live and breathe Grim Dawn, and that I have been a part of its community for more than a decade. This doesn't mean my word is gospel. There are plenty in the community that don't agree with everything I have to say about the game, and that's perfectly reasonable. But I've been here a while. I've seen all the ups and downs across Grim Dawn's lifespan, and I can say with absolute certainty that Fangs of Asterkarn is one of, if not its highest high point of all time. Now, final thing before we dive into the meat of the review itself, this is the second time I'm recording this review. The first time, I sent Xantai, the lead developer and producer for Grim Dawn at Crate Entertainment, the script of this review and this video to give him some feedback. And a few days later, he/Crate changed a number of things in the expansion that I complained about. So, Xantai, if you're watching this, what follows from here is not exactly the script I gave you. I didn't intend to bait and switch you, but you baited and switched me, so we'll call it even. Anyways, onto the review itself. Kicking things off with the new parts of the world to explore. It's big. Crate has put up some comparisons of the rough area in square kilometers of this expansion relative to the base game and the game's first 2 expansions, but I don't think the numbers really do it justice, even though they confirm Fangs of Asterkarn is larger than the first 2 expansions combined. When I said earlier that Fangs of Asterkarn felt like a sequel, its sheer size is partly why. If you know what you're doing, you can probably blitz through the Ashes of Malmouth and/or Forgotten Gods campaigns in an hour, maybe 2. I think if you build up that same level of familiarity with Fangs of Asterkarn, it'll still take you the better part of an afternoon or evening to get through. That's assuming you're ignoring all the side quests and secrets, of which those 2 are longer and more involved than they had been in previous content. But bigger isn't always better. Thankfully, the quality of maps and zones in Fangs of Asterkarn is the best it's ever been, from the general layout of these areas to the mob density within them, to the art direction that creates some truly breathtaking vistas that I haven't seen matched in any other ARPG on the market. There were a few areas that drag in vanilla Grim Dawn or its earlier expansions for me, such as the Lawn Hall to Darkvale Gate, or the lookalike dunes of the Corvin Desert. But I don't think there's a single area in Fangs of Asterkarn that wasn't enjoyable to me. If anything, many of them left me wanting more despite how vast they were already. Each area feels distinct and memorable, which will do wonders in the long run when we begin farming for specific monster and frequent enemy drops down the road. I am also compelled to point out with extreme emphasis that these areas feel like Grim Dawn again. That is to say, for as much as I enjoyed Forgotten Gods and all the life it breathed into the game, aesthetically and intangibly, its world felt foreign. By design, of course, it takes place in a distant land with problems disconnected from those Erelon faces. But Fangs of Asterkarn is a return to form to the setting that many of us bought into initially. Fangs of Asterkarn feels more down-to-earth and personal, with threats significantly more tangible and buried in human nature than the divine pantheon of Forgotten Gods. Fangs of Asterkarn feels like Grim Dawn again, and I cannot emphasize that point enough. Accentuating this point even further is the expansion's soundtrack. While you're going through these stellar areas reminiscent of vanilla Grim Dawn, you'll be listening to a soundtrack that should harken back to your first time exploring the swamps of Whitemire or the Broken Hills south of Tyrant's Hold. If you're looking for that vibe again, Fangs of Asterkarn delivers better than I can put into words. I would give Fangs of Asterkarn's world an 11 out of 10 if I could. It is perfection in the utmost, an outright masterclass in environment design that I hope modern and future entries in the genre aspire to. If I'm absolutely forced to find a criticism about Fangs of Asterkarn's world, it's that there's too many beasts. Expect to run into Chupacabra a lot while playing this expansion's content, which kind of sucks, because we were already running into Chupacabra a lot. Is this enough to take my aforementioned 11 out of 10 down a peg? No, not at all. But fewer beasts, I say, more literally anyone else. To discuss the Berserker, I feel compelled to bring up Grim Dawn's history with prior expansion masteries. Ashes of Malmuth's Inquisitor and Necromancer both introduced some substantial power creep. Inquisitor brought forth Aura of Censure, which was, for many years, the single best exclusive skill in the entire game, though today, it is a shadow of its former self. Necromancer, meanwhile, provided some of the most potent and easily splashable sources of plant damage and incoming damage reduction that to this day still see use, to say nothing of the fact that it is the quintessential linchpin of powerhouse pet builds. Forgotten Gods Oathkeeper, however, blew these two out of the water when it came to power creep. Featuring the best non-exclusive source of resistance reduction in the game, featuring the only in-mastery point-to-point mobility option in the game, and featuring what is, in my opinion, the most intrinsically strong skill in the game, Oathkeeper was, bar none, the statistically best mastery in Grim Dawn. Even today, after countless balance patches, the flavor of its usage may have shifted somewhat, but it remains present in a never-ending tide of top-performing builds. So, does Berserker push the fold even further? Well, no, I don't think so. I'm not going to call the Berserker weak, but I will say that it is probably the weakest Day 1 expansion mastery. Maybe this means Trait has learned from past mistakes and has future-proofed the Berserker's design. Time will tell. There are two flagship selling points to Berserker that I think are worth addressing: transformations / wereforms, and onslaught. When I recorded this review the first time, I spent about 3 minutes roasting the hell out of the wereforms. They were temporary buffs that did not feel great to juggle uptime on when weighed against the investment required to get suitable damage out of them, and the most appealing items for wereform builds were those that simply made them permanent, which limited endgame gearing diversity. Now, the wereforms are permanent by default, and everything has changed, including much of my negativity about Berserker as a whole. The new wereforms feel great from the first moment you pick up Berserker, to the point at which you fully gear up your character and maximize your power. I think Wereraven is both slightly cooler and a bit inherently stronger than Werewolf, by virtue of being caster-centric rather than melee-centric, but that is something that might be hashed out via subsequent balance patches. Truth be told, at this point in time I do not have much feedback to give or content to review here, because the modern wereforms are nearly as new to me as they will be to you. I've had barely a couple weeks to toy around with them, and have not yet settled on a concrete and thorough opinion of where they land. What has not changed, however, is Onslaught. Likely devised to combat the community's tendencies to favor spammable or auto-attack abilities, Onslaught is a mechanic that multiplicatively boosts the damage of cooldown-based skills. It stacks multiplicatively with other multipliers like total damage modification, and each stack of Onslaught provides a 15% boost, additive with itself, to your next cooldown-based damaging skill. That's a lot of words, but basically, if you have 4 stacks of Onslaught and then cast a Doom Bolt, your Doom Bolt will deal 60% more damage. Pretty cool. There are a couple of problems here, however. First of all, it takes some good effort to build up enough Onslaught stacks. We're not playing Path of Exile. Our speeds in Grim Dawn are far lower, meaning the rate at which we can accrue stacks of things is measured in multiple seconds rather than mere instants. This means you'll be spending an extended period of time not getting benefits from Onslaught. But wait, Xeno, you cry, that lets me build Onslaught during my cooldowns. Yes, true. But when you break that thought process down in practice, that still implies a good initial period of time with negligible build performance, something most builds just don't suffer from. Second of all, at a certain point, more damage is not what many skills need. I made an Onslaught build that let me one-shot a Nemesis in high Shattered Realm shards, but it kinda sucked. Yeah, it was pretty funny to delete Fabius from existence, but high damage is not a scarcity in Grim Dawn. More utility, area of effect, or versatility, like debuffs, are of greater import than making the funny damage number go up. Thirdly, Onslaught is confusing. What exactly does it work on, and what doesn't it work on? It doesn't affect pets, obviously, but that also means it doesn't affect pseudo-pets, like Inquisitor runes. Or so I thought when I first recorded this review. Then I received correction on this matter from Crate, specifying in no uncertain terms that Inquisitor runes do benefit from Onslaught. But the fact that this sort of stuff requires external developer confirmation rather than in-game communication speaks volumes to the extent of unintuitiveness that Onslaught brings to the table. From testing, there seemed to be a mixed understanding on Onslaught's interaction with persistent damage skills, like Blackwater Cocktail or Sigil Consumption. Does it affect the whole duration of the skill, or just the first instance of damage? None of this is inherently obvious to players, and instead these specific circumstances are obfuscated deep within the arcane witchcraft of Grim Dawn's archaic engine. And furthermore, on the subject of being confusing, thus far I've been talking about Onslaught the mechanic, but Berserker has a skill named Onslaught. Onslaught the skill builds stacks of Onslaught the mechanic, but it's not the only way to get stacks of Onslaught, except it seems like stacks from different Onslaught sources do not stack together. Confounded? You should be. Berserker of course has more to offer than just Wereforms and Onslaught too. The new weapon pool skills are great. Avalanche more than Bloodfangs. Leap is a great movement skill with decent damage backing it, and Winds of Asterkarn is extremely fun. Statistically, there are also some extremely powerful buffs and debuffs in the Mastery too, making it an excellent choice for many builds, but the big flagship selling points for Berserker are either only recently improved upon in the final hour of the expansion's testing, or remain centered around confusing and unintuitive gameplay mechanics. Another flagship feature of the expansion is the all-new Ascended mode. Think of this as normal difficulty's veteran modifier, but for ultimate, and only usable by characters that are level 100. Ascended mode beefs up the enemies of the campaign world to all new heights, making the overworld as threatening as the endgame Shattered Realm. There's unique loot to be had in Ascended difficulty too, namely in terms of the new Ascended affixes, which we'll get into in a bit. But much like the Shattered Realm, one of the most rewarding parts of Ascended difficulty is that rare tier monster infrequents of all kinds can drop from any boss chest. You can kill Kubakaba in the new areas, open his Nemesis Trove, and be rewarded with MIs from the Corvin Basin. Of course, specifically targeting set monsters for their infrequents may prove a quicker avenue to getting exactly what you want. But the loot shower of endgame Shattered Realm finally comes to the campaign experience, allowing players to simply play the game wherever they want and be rewarded for their time doing so. Of course, if you spend too much time in Ascended difficulty, you may draw the ire of a particularly dreadful enemy that will hunt you down like no other before it. I won't go into too many specifics on this foul creature, but I will say that it is probably the most awesome looking and well designed boss encounter in the entire game. It also has an exceptionally kick-ass theme that plays when it finally finds you. Absolutely keep an eye out for this beast. Assuming you survive your encounter, you will be gratuitously rewarded for your efforts. Rewarded how, you may ask? Well, with resources required to ascend your equipment. More than 2 years ago, Crate teased ascended equipment in Grim Misadventure number 183 as being common quality items with unique affixes on them. Well, that entire system was redone from the ground up, and that misadventure is no longer representative of what ascended equipment actually looks like. Instead, any non-relic item can be ascended on demand, for a hefty cost of resources. This means legendaries, epics, monster infrequents, and yes, common items. An ascended item will have a unique affix slapped onto it, some of which can provide skill modders for your presently selected masteries, others of which will provide generally potent statistical benefits. The lower the rarity tier of an item, the stronger ascended affixes it will have access to. Ascended items provide a new means to push your characters to their utmost, and a new way to min-max every build across the game. For the challenges Ascended difficulty has to offer, you're going to need all the help you can get. If you want to push things even further, you can use the new Ascension Altar to amplify particular rewards in a manner of your choosing, at the cost of further giving enemies a tremendous edge against you. While the Ascension Altar will be available on all difficulties, only the best of the best will be able to tackle a full altar on Ascended difficulty, but the potential rewards will certainly be worth all the effort. It should be noted that Ascended difficulty does not modify the Shattered Realm, and I do not believe there's an analog in the Crucible. It is purely a modifier for the campaign experience. I really like Ascended difficulty. I really like the possibilities provided by Ascended affixes, and I really liked the Ascension Altar. Everything here is a complete win in my book. If I had to complain about anything in Ascended difficulty, it would be about some of its other added features, namely Resplendent Troves, Voidmont Chests, and Tempest Totems. Resplendent Troves are beefed-up treasure chests with enhanced loot inside them. Voidmont Chests are ordinary lootables that spawn a horde of enemies upon being opened, and Tempest Totems are another brand of totem with severely more challenging spawns. I'd say Tempest Totems are probably the most boring of this trio, but they are also by far the most common. You can use the Ascension Altar to increase your odds at seeing any of these, but by default, Tempest Totems are already a dime a dozen, whereas I've gone dozens of hours without seeing Voidmont Chests or Resplendent Troves. This might just need some number tweaking behind the scenes to make these features more readily engageable by players without the use of the Ascension Altar, but for now I fully expect most players will venture through Fangs of Asterkarn on Ascended difficulty without ever seeing them. But all in all, the new difficulty is a lot of fun, and extremely rewarding to boot. 2 thumbs up from me. I'm going to try to keep this section pretty high level so as to avoid spoilers. While I think very few people find story or lore a selling point of an ARPG, I do think there's enough interest in Grim Dawns to warrant discussion on the merits of its strengths in this expansion. Does Fangs of Asterkarn feel consistent with the story of the rest of the setting? I would say so, more so than Forgotten Gods, which came rather out of left field. Fangs of Asterkarn feels like a proper follow-up to the events of the Necropolis and the Ligurian. If you've been following previous Grim Misadventures, Great Entertainment's developer blogs for Grim Dawn, you'll know the expansion has a pretty heavy chthonic presence. This does consequently mean there isn't much ethereal involvement, so for those looking for closure on some straddling mammoth plot threads, you'll have to keep waiting for until Grim Dawn 2, it seems. I do think it's a bit of a shame the storytelling is so binary with regard to the factions at play. Yes, I am Team Ethereal over Team Chthonic, so there's a bias here, but for what is supposedly a multiversal conflict between these two groups, we've barely seen any of it. I think it's a continued missed opportunity to not include some actual frontline exposure to the battleground between the Ethereals and the Servants of Chthon. Instead, we continue to get a lot of behind-the-scenes build-up and the sabotaging of comparatively minor plans from these two groups. Having said that, the story we do get in Fangs of Asterkarn is compelling enough as far as ARPG stories go. It makes the world feel more cogent and connected than other campaigns have before it. In light of the addition of Ascendant mode, I think it's a recurring theme for this expansion, giving players a reason to revisit the entirety of the Grim Dawn world. This isn't an expansion, and is only relevant to its own secluded area of the map. Fangs of Asterkarn is relevant to everything, everywhere. I do think this is a genuinely fantastic approach to the narrative that makes the world feel more real and alive. Let's be honest, this is why most of us are here. New items, new builds to make, new stuff. I've spoken already about Ascended affixes in my overview of Ascended difficulty, so I won't repeat myself too much in that regard. I will say that Ascended affixes do seem mildly powerful, which is a good thing. I don't think they should be too over the top as an endgame system, instead offering a means to min-max things or round out some edges of your build that still need work. I do think there are cases where Ascended affixes can be relatively build-defining, however, mostly in areas where it's hard to get plus skills to certain modifiers on certain setups. For instance, there are ascended affixes that grant plus full spread, the Stunjax modifier, which has historically been hard to max on non-set builds. I would like to believe that in the future these edge cases will be tackled by future MI support or individual item support, accompanying the upcoming post-release content. But it may well be that players need to rely on specific ascended affixes to fulfill these niches. That would be a shame to me in the long run, but only time will tell in this regard. One point of feedback I kept coming back to was the idea of pre-ascended items dropping innately out in the world, rarely, on ascended difficulty or from ascended mechanics, such as the aforementioned Tempest totems. Grim Dawn has long lacked different vectors for loot variety, with most rewards being measured in sheer quantity rather than quality. I think this would be an avenue for further improvement to Grim Dawn's loot systems, and it's a request I've seen echoed by the community in the occasional forum posts leading up to the expansion's release, as players got to see the systems at play in preview streams and promotional material. Fingers crossed that Crate experiments with this notion in the future. But Ascended affixes are not the only new avenue for customizing characters. We've also gotten potion customization, at long last. I think the potion customization is neat, but feels a bit shallow. You'll be able to make both your health and energy potions each take up one of 3 archetypes, and you'll be able to improve these archetypes directly as you progress in the expansion. But I think it's a missed opportunity to only have these 3 archetypes, which are available initially and only get slightly better bit by bit over extended gameplay. If there were unique potion archetypes that were not immediately available to players, that perhaps did not evolve/improve over time, I think there might be some added depth to this mechanic. Now, obviously, 3 archetypes is not indicative of the 6,000-something potion combinations Crate has teased in their featured previews. In addition to these archetypes, you will be able to give your health and energy potions 2 additional modifiers, each, that do provide some pretty unique functionality. You could make your energy potion heal health in addition to energy, and you could make your health potion deal damage around you. And if I'm being honest, these are the tamer of the opportunities available through these modifiers. Again, I'm withholding specifics for spoiler reasons, but suffice to say that there are many interesting ways you can tweak your potions to your liking and use them to push the power of your character to new heights. For the Grim Tools warriors among us, potion setups are hereafter going to be a crucial element of build crafting. And then there's the inclusion of awakened epics, woke epics as the cool kids call them. These are epics that you can turn into legendaries. There aren't a ton of these relative to the number of epics in the game, but those that are available to be awakened do turn out rather intriguingly, and there have definitely been builds enabled in my playtesting by some of these items. Crate has hinted that we will see more woke epics in the future, and I do hope we go from the slim minority available to us now to an eventual majority of epics being able to be awakened. And finally, there's all the new MIs and legendaries and sets added in this expansion. There are a few standouts, some great meme items, and as ever, some items that are just unfortunate letdowns, which is all to say your typical smattering of new loot. I don't mean to downplay all the new items here, only to say that the mountain of loot that falls into this category is well consistent with its predecessors. All in all, as someone who has already made hundreds of Grim Dawn builds in my time, Fangs of Asterkarn will undoubtedly result in my making more builds than any expansion prior. I can already hear my system straining under the weight of dozens of Grim Tools tabs being open in my browser. Sad to say, there is no cadence set that meets my lofty expectations, alas. There's not really too much to say here, but I felt I would be remiss to not include such a section in this review. Fangs of Asterkarn does not seem any more or less performant than the rest of Grim Dawn. If you experienced technical issues with Grim Dawn in the past, I can't say I expect them to improve in Fangs of Asterkarn, but I also wouldn't expect them to worsen. I've never had any performance problems with the game, and I still do not have any in this expansion. There are a few areas with heavier weather effects that may degrade performance for some users, but again, I personally experienced no such issues. I said it at the start of this script, and I'll say it again here. I think Fangs of Asterkarn is the best piece of Grim Dawn content since Grim Dawn first released in 2016. It's certainly the best expansion. In lieu of the actual release of Grim Dawn 2, This expansion feels like a true sequel to the game, in every way imaginable, while of course retaining the game's core identity because it is, ultimately, merely DLC. Is everything about the expansion perfect? No. I'd like to have seen more ethereals, more tweaks to the Ascension Altar and potion customization, and more and better cadence items. But all of that is minor stuff in the grand scheme of things. What's here is very, very good, and it is no overstatement to say that there is a ton of content here. I physically cannot recommend Fangs of Asterkarn enough, and I cannot wait to see what comes after. Enough chit-chat. Go buy it. I have mountains to climb, demons to slay, and loot to get.